Hello, everyone. I'm Erica Cohn, the director of Belly of the Beast. Thank you all for tuning in tonight for this essential conversation about reparations for forced sterilization survivors. I would like to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshu, and Ute tribal nations on which I'm learning, working, and organizing from today. I encourage you all to share your own land acknowledgement in the chat. If you haven't yet had a chance to view the film, please go to bellyofthebeastfilm.com/watch to purchase a ticket to watch the film digitally in partnership with a theater of your choosing. 50% of your ticket purchase goes to support the independent theater during these challenging times, and 20% goes to a local reproductive justice, prison abolition, or racial justice organization in the same city as the theater of your choosing. I have spent the past decade examining human rights abuses, including forced sterilization in California's women's prisons, as both a volunteer legal advocate and as a filmmaker, and have experienced the levels of secrecy and privacy institutions hide behind, which make it incredibly difficult to uncover abuses of power and state-sponsored violence. We need accountability for these eugenic practices, justice for the survivors, and safeguards to prevent future abuses. One of the ways we can do so is through reparations. In the making of the film, throughout the past decade, our team has documented the unfolding reparations campaigns in North Carolina and Virginia, where legislation was passed to compensate survivors who were coercively sterilized through the historical eugenics programs. It was always my hope that California, the state that I call home, the state where Nazi leaders learned about eugenics policies, the state where nearly 1/3 of historical forced sterilizations in the United States were performed, the state where illegal sterilizations continued to occur in the 21st century, would be next. California can follow in the footsteps of North Carolina and Virginia, and when they do, it will ensure accountability for modern day instances of forced sterilization, like what happened a few years ago in California's women's prisons and what has just happened in the ICE detention center in Georgia. I'd now like to introduce Ko Bragg, a reporter for the 19th who has written about healthcare in California's women's prisons and recently published a fabulous piece about Belly of the Beast, which I encourage you all to read. We are so lucky to have her moderating our panel today. Ko, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thank you, Erica, and thank you for your work. It was a pleasure to witness this film, write about it, and to be here talking about this work with you guys. So yeah, my name is Ko Bragg. I'm based in New Orleans on Choctaw and Chitimacha land. And I'm a reporter at the 19th, which is a newly launched nonprofit newsroom that is focused on the intersection of gender, policy, and politics. And as a general assignment reporter there, I have the room and the privilege to dig deep on a lot of issues. And some of those issues, as Erica mentioned, have been healthcare inside women's prisons in California, particularly pertaining to COVID-19, and also getting to watch Belly of the Beast and talk to Erica Cohn and Kelli Dillon about the film. And so tonight, I'm excited to introduce this panel of guests to have a discussion about reparations in California and what that means for 2020 and beyond. And so first, I'll introduce Carly Myers, a staff attorney at the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund. Next, I'll introduce Lorena Garcia Zermeño, and she's a policy and communications coordinator for CLRJ. Next, I will introduce Romero Lynn Ralston, organizer and policy associate with California Coalition for Women Prisoners. Next, I'll introduce Cynthia Chandler, an attorney featured in the film Belly of the Beast. And last but not least, I'll introduce Kelli Dillon, film participant in Belly of the Beast. And so to kick it off, I will have Lorena talk to us about where the reparations movement legislation stands in California currently.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. I'm so happy to be here with you all today, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to discuss a little bit about where our efforts, our legislative efforts are to ensure compensation and reparations for survivors of forced sterilization. So in California, for the last 3 years, we have been working on ensuring that California establishes the forced sterilization compensation program, which just to give a little bit of context, this bill that started this year with the number AB 3052, authored by Assemblymember Wendy Carrillo, and we also were spearheading a tandem budget request this year to ensure that survivors of forced sterilizations under California Eugenics laws between 1909 and 1979 in state institutions would receive reparations and the subsequent sterilizations that occurred post 1979 in California women's prisons, which, as you all have most likely already seen Belly of the Beast, and if not, you really encourage you all to really do so. That really uplifts the particular cases of forced sterilizations that happen in California women's prisons. And our current efforts, as I mentioned, this is our third attempt. It's our third year this year that we try to pass legislation for this program to be approved and implemented. And like Erica mentioned at the beginning, California would not be the first state. North Carolina passed a similar legislation in 2013, and Virginia passed similar legislation in 2015. And our current efforts, as I mentioned, this is our third year, and this year, unfortunately, our bill died. Our bill did not advance forward. It died in Assembly Appropriations, and we continued, however, although our bill did not make it very far this year because of the challenges that arose because of COVID-19, we were still pushing forward our budget request, and we were trying to secure the $7.5 million to make sure that this program was able to actually be approved and implemented. And while we had a lot of challenges because of COVID-19 and the legislature having to do significant shifts in their priorities and a lot of financial barriers that were going to be faced for California, we unfortunately were not able to secure the funds this year. However, because of the recent headlines that broke out that in the ICE detention center in Georgia, we suddenly saw a lot of interest from our legislatures, which we've been fighting for years, right, to try to get this approved. And we saw a slight window of opportunity, which is very devastating that it had to take yet another news outbreak of yet another instance of forced sterilizations in this country. And because there was a lot of interest, we are now currently trying to secure the governor's support to ensure that our budget requests will be included into the governor's budget proposal in January. And this will be hopefully an attempt to expedite, so we wouldn't have to necessarily go through the entire lengthy process next year. And if we do get the support that we are fighting really hard for, then we would be able to secure the budget request in January through the governor's support. And so that's currently where we are at with our legislative efforts and efforts to secure the funding. And I did just want to point out that we are going to need as much support as we can to make sure that this happens. And we need community support to do that as well. And in the next few weeks, we are going to launch a campaign after the election, and we're really trying to rally our community members to urge Governor Newsom to support this request. And so I highly encourage you and ask you all to please follow our social medias, CLRJ, DREDF, CCWP, so that you can stay up to date with our legislative efforts and several different action alerts that we will be announcing, and to ask for folks' support in making this happen.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think that this might be a good moment, just so that we have a starting point for everyone, no matter if they've seen the film or not, to play the trailer. And so I'll let the tech folks handle that.
There is a culture of secrecy in California.
I have some fear. What kind of repercussions will I get for coming on and talking about this?
I've always been a fighter, but it wasn't truly birthed until I was in prison.
They did a pelvic exam.
He said I had a fibroid.
I was told that I had cancer cells.
When I came out, I felt like something was wrong.
We were getting hundreds of letters about medical abuses every month.
When was the first time a doctor told you that you may be missing your ovaries?
No one ever told me that. I had been intentionally sterilized, and I had been lied to.
The law prohibits sterilizing people in prison for the purpose of birth control, but they were doing it anyway.
One of the challenges with this story is you ultimately have to get to intent. And then that's when the doctor said, well, that's cheaper than welfare.
I was looking at these documents that was confirming, as a Black woman, my life wasn't shit.
What's going on?
I was very much intimidated by whom I was going up against.
The state has admitted that they have done these illegal surgeries, but we don't actually know who they did them on.
Women's become numbers. You don't get names. And that's what makes it easy to abuse them.
Women in California being coercively sterilized is absolutely revolting.
After all this pain, I'll never be the same.
We have yet to get an apology. We have yet to be acknowledged. The state has to be made accountable.
'Cause some wounds never heal. Do you see what you done?
Wow. I'm glad we played that trailer, even though it always, I don't know, gives me chills, leaves me just with a lot of different emotions. And I want to, I think, naturally go to Cynthia and Kelli, just sort of about what making this film has done for either the conversation or for either clarifying your life's work, your purpose, the need for reparations. So yeah, I just would like to pivot to y'all, either one, and I'll hear from both of you about this film and what it means and what you hope it does for the audience.
You have first, Kelli.
Oh, that was cold. I thought she was going to go first.
No.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia. That was good move, good move. She's an attorney. Never forget that. She's an attorney. She's always about the strategy. But no, for me, just the whole making of the film, just how all of this got started, I never would have thought we would have ended up here. I just never would have thought that. So I just got to be honest with you about that. I never thought we would have come this far. And with Cynthia starting off to just help another woman that she saw that was in pain, that was treated unfairly, I don't think we all foresee that the work would have been on the massive scale that it is today. You know. I just feel like when I watched the trailer of the film, there's a part of me that feels that I feel connected, but at the same time, it seems like it's so much more larger than what I remember. Eric, I can't say it enough, Erica and Christian and everyone did an excellent job of documenting our lives as we were working towards justice for me, justice for the survivors in California, and then coming together with California Latina Reproductive Justice Project, coming together alongside of them. I think it created a purpose for us all in that moment. And so I'm just going to speak, from that, and I'm going to turn it back over to Cynthia.
Thanks. So just so folks know, I mean, the film covers a 20-year effort that Kelli and I made alongside many other activists from both Justice Now and many other organizations, and took 10 years to make. So 20 years has been the work, and 10 years to make. We've kind of grown up with each other at this point. And the whole time the film was being made, I kept saying, how in the world, Erica, are you going to turn this into a film that anyone would want to watch? Like, it's the most depressing, tragic story I can imagine. Like, how can this be a film, right? And I hope when folks watch it, what they see is it's really an epic tale about how we all can make change, that across different barriers of race and prison walls and many barriers, if you persevere and come together, we all can affect change in a grand level. And I believe strongly that, you know, in all the work that we did all along, I believe really strongly was about exposing how entrenched in our society white supremacy is, and also ableism, and how it affects all of our institutions, including our family formation, and that's by design. That's about the way that oppressed communities are controlled and denied the right to have a future. And it's not, I think, until we actually accept that white supremacy is pushing this, that we're actually going to have accountability and we're actually going to see change. And I hope that this is the first step towards exposing what's been going on so it can be acknowledged, it can be understood, and it can be stopped.
Yeah, thank you for that, both of you, for your reflections. I want to go to Carly and just ask you to talk a little bit about how sterilizations through eugenics movements have impacted the disabled community.
Sure. So, I mean, people with disabilities have been forced into sterilization for most of history. In California, in 1909, a law was passed not just permitting, but affirmatively encouraging the sterilization of people who were institutionalized, often against their will. Like, they were institutionalized against their will, but then also sterilized without proper consent, sometimes without knowledge. Sometimes the women or men that were sterilized were as young as 14 years old. They had their whole future in front of them. But because they had a disability or a perceived disability, they were seen as individuals who we as a society wouldn't want to reproduce. And that law was on the books in multiple forms for 70 years. And even after it was repealed, we still see, even today, the disproportionate targeting of the reproductive rights of people with disabilities. And I guess furthermore, we really saw a shift then, going outside of just disability. The whole history of sterilization in the state of California has been, at its foundation, very intersectional. So it's not just people with disabilities impacted. It's primarily it was Latina women who were sterilized, who had either had disabilities or who were regarded as having disabilities, or who were what the state considered deviant in society. Excuses were made. It's disgusting. It's horrifying, and I'm so thankful to be a part of this team in the efforts that we're really trying to make a change here in California and set a precedent for the rest of the country to follow.
Yeah, Marilyn, I want to go to you next and talk a little bit about, you know, in the trailer, there's a line about just how hard it is to breach prisons in terms of just getting straightforward information, getting an idea of what goes on. And so when you have something to the level of forced sterilizations, what does that mean for it to go on in a prison setting, especially as, you know, I think more Americans are understanding about this, or it's on their minds, as we heard the whistleblower report out of the ICE detention center in Georgia.
Thank you so much, Ko. First of all, Kelli, you know, your contributions to this film are amazing, and I'm so sorry to hear that the prison system, you know, violated you in such a horrible way. As an organizer with the California Coalition for Women Prisoners, we have been advocating for the rights of women, gender nonconforming, and trans people inside California prisons for over 25 years. We're very proud co-sponsors on this legislation here in California, and we're going to continue to fight for compensation and reparations for as long as we can. The prison system here in California and across the country, these are sites where folks go and for the most part are disappeared from society. And so our bodies become property of the state. And we're not property of the state. We're wards of the state. It is the state's responsibility not just to protect society and promote public safety while we serve our sentences, but also to take care of us, not to mutilate us and sterilize us. The prison system has to be accountable for their actions. And that's what this legislation is all about. It's calling into question, those who have power over people's bodies to be not only respectful of those bodies, but also to protect them from physicians whom they hire, who have the authority and the skill to commit these kinds of harms. So it's really unfortunate that when women are sentenced to incarceration, we face all of these different types of violences. When we're coming out of traumatic environments and communities and families and relationships that put us on the path to incarceration. So it's really my hope that Governor Newsom will support this legislation, support this bill request, and that those who support women in general, not just incarcerated women and formerly incarcerated women, women who have been mutilated and violated by the state, but women. Because as you've heard from Carly and Cynthia and Lorena, this has been going on for over 70 years. The eugenics movement has violated women of all races, all nationalities, and all ages. And it's time for not just the state, but I think this country to be accountable and responsible for the harm that they have done. And kudos to Virginia and kudos to the other states who have stepped up and have taken that responsibility. And now we call for California to lead the way and model the way for others. And so it's just really an amazing opportunity to be part of this panel today and to talk about what's really needed and the protection of women. So I'm hoping that in this next year, as we move into January, that all of the issues surrounding women's needs are met, not just the racial and gender injustices, but also the sexual violence that women endure every day, not just in prisons, but in our homes.
Yeah, and thank you so much for that. It brings me to another question, which is, I know that when I, for example, wrote about the film Belly of the Beast for the 19th, where I work, did an interview with Kelli and the director of the film, Erica, and I think the reaction that I got on Twitter, and then I also saw when the news broke about the whistleblower out of the ICE detention center in Georgia, was just shock and awe from a lot of people who were just stunned, frankly, that this happens. And when more context was coming out about the history of eugenics, of sterilization, I think people just fundamentally can't believe it, but it's part of this country's history. And I just wonder, I would like to hear y'all kind of talk about why there's such a gap and how to fix that gap of the shock and awe that comes out when there is news, and the reality that there are opportunities to pass reparations laws, to pass laws to stop this in prisons, in society, and how do you fix that gap?
Is it okay if I jump in a little bit? Is that okay, folks? So I think part of what's going on in the sort of the shock and horror that people are experiencing is a result of the lack of accountability that's happened over the years and the lack of acknowledgement of eugenics. I mean, when Kelli and I first started doing this work, I would go to my fellow prisoner rights organizations, reproductive rights organizations even, and say, look, you know, what we're seeing is eugenic. And people will say, like that, what do you mean it's not perfect? I'm like, no, not utopic, eugenic. And there literally wasn't even the word in the lexicon. We too had a whistleblower who came forward and let us know that the Department of Corrections had actually created a plan to increase efficiency by sterilizing women in prison during labor and delivery, and part of that's covered in the movie. And the whistleblower who came forward to us, who came to me, didn't have the words to explain what made it wrong. She said, you know, this happened, they approved this, and it seems wrong, and I don't know why, but I know your organization is looking at reproductive rights of people in prison, so I thought maybe you would know why. So this part of what's happened, rather than having justice, which requires accountability, acknowledgement, and atonement for a harm, we've shoved it under the rug so often, and the victims have been so vulnerable in our society and so oppressed that it's made it sort of disappear. And I was not surprised about what was released about what happened in ICE. What was a bit shocking to me was how uncanny the similarities were. And reading the descriptions of the harms that had happened were almost verbatim from what we documented inside the California women's prisons. I mean, literally verbatim, and I have no doubt that this is happening elsewhere. Just a few weeks ago, it was released that Los Angeles County was administering estrogen to teenage boys in youth authority without their knowledge, without their parents' knowledge. And it was medically totally counterindicated, clearly medically castrating those boys at the time. So this is omnipresent. And when we even look at COVID and the way that disabled people, medically vulnerable people, and our elders are being asked to surrender themselves and sacrifice themselves to our economy, that's another form of eugenics, right? I really believe this won't change until we come to grips with the fact that undergirding all of this is a pattern of both ableism and white supremacy that we must change. And we have to name it. We have to have these reparations as a first step. And I'd encourage everyone to sign a petition that we have to demand the budget request for reparations in California. You can get it at the Belly of the Beast website, which is bellyofthebeastfilm.com. Sign that petition. Let's make this a model that can spread across the country. And we can really start challenging this. And I want to just say one thing. Part of the push in California is also to notify people that they were sterilized inside the prisons, because so many of the sterilizations happen during abdominal surgeries like Kelli's, or during labor and delivery. We suspect that most, if not all, of the victims don't even know they were sterilized. It was only by accident that we learned what happened to Kelli, or by happenstance. And there were a dozen other people like Kelli that we were able to find and inform, tragically, that they have been sterilized without their knowledge. So it's so important, again, that we have this kind of accountability, and we're counting on folks who watch the film to help us by signing that petition. So do it. Thank you.
Yeah. I just want to jump in behind Cynthia if I can, because she nails it all the time. But part of that you were talking about, I think Cynthia spoke about ableism, but the reason why there's a disconnect between the shock and awe and what has been going on is because this has been successful practices that has been going on for over 100 years, about 100 years now, and throughout our correctional institutions, our mental health institutions, as well as our medical institutions. And now it's also happening, like she said, with the juvenile, and it's also happening in our public schools. Right, that they're issuing certain birth control practices to children unbeknownst to their family or their parents, to even try to monitor what's happening to them. So like you said, we get the shock and the awe because it's been hidden. But once it's hidden, it perpetuates a cycle of then, like what we're doing right now. We've been trying to hold California accountable, as everyone on the panel has said. And part of them denying the budget or denying the bill is keeping what they have done hidden. Because part of that compensation, that reparation bill, as Cynthia just expressed to you guys, is that the funding that will come from reparations will go to a committee that is then in charge and held accountable to do just that, to identify and notify unknown survivors or victims, right, of these sterilizations. So as long as they can suppress the budget and suppress the compensation, then they keep the victims and the practices that they have done hidden. So that's the reason why there's a everybody, all the officials and elected officials and the Congress people and the councilmen and the assembly people can, you know, clutch their pearls and shock and awe. But when it comes to just standing on pushing that line for that budget, or pushing that line to make sure that they want to really right their wrongs, as everyone says, then that's where the disconnect comes from. That's in my opinion.
Oh, Kelly, I think you just nailed it. And I just want to echo what both you and Cynthia said, that if we don't have reparations, there is no accountability. And we have a precedent to look to. So in 2003, the governor and the state senate formally apologized for the eugenics sterilizations that the state of California perpetrated is the right word. Mm-hmm. They sterilized 20,000 people and they gave one formal apology. And what did it do? Nothing. Because we're seeing this repeatedly again in prisons and in ICE detention centers as just two examples. So we need reparations, or this is going to continue to happen. An apology is nothing if it is not accompanied with a material acknowledgement.
I agree. Thank you so much, Carly and Kelly and Cynthia. I agree with everything that you said. Reparations is not only just going to do that, I think it's going to also establish that not just a wrong has been done and that an apology needs to be done, but it will prevent this from happening in the future. And it would also, you know, I think address this idea of who's deserving and who's undeserving. You know, folks who end up in a prison cell in a cage, you know, are considered undeserving, and they get what they deserve. And as long as we're a part of this kind of punishment culture, if we don't start to humanize folks who are relegated into these prison cells, oftentimes because they're poor and Black and brown people who are under enormous oppressions and stress in their communities, then these kinds of things are going to continue to happen. So I really hope that California and Governor Newsom will, you know, support the budget requests for compensation and reparations, because it sends a signal across this country that women's bodies are valuable and important. And it sends the message that incarcerated people deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. And it would just humanize, you know, who we are as individuals, and that we have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness outside of those prison cells, outside of those cages. And that includes reproducing and creating families and living a healthy life and watching them grow and learn. And the state has no right to take that away from us.
I also just really briefly wanted to uplift that, agree obviously with what everybody has also mentioned, that I think that part of what our efforts are also really trying to push with this budget request is, you know, in having these conversations with different legislative offices and in trying to inform not just folks in the Capitol, in the building, but also our community members, is making that connection between the long violent legacy and history, like folks are mentioning, of eugenics across the country, but also how it plays out in different forms. Sterilizations are one very awful, egregious example, and there are so many other ways that eugenics has manifested and continues to manifest in our communities. You know, through different forms. For example, different family cap policies across the country that put caps on providing cash assistance for families that have, you know, multiple kids, for example, to repress and prevent the types of family formations that folks want to have. And so I think one of the things that is super important to also uplift is how eugenics primarily targets it's very intentional. It targets Black, Indigenous, Latinx folks, people with disabilities, poor people, and it really shapes the way that it's so like ingrained, right, in our society, and it shapes the way that not just policymakers but our society and institutions, how our communities are perceived. That really has such a deeply rooted effects that we continue to see, and that make these situations permissible and happen, right? And we continue to see that happen. And I think one of the things that we are always trying to elevate and let people understand is that eugenics and forced sterilizations have never stopped in this country. From the time colonizers came here, right, and tore families of Indigenous families apart, through the systematic, you know, it's been systematic since the foundation of this country. And I think it's something we need to acknowledge and elevate and understand that it's been happening and it continues to happen. And it's something that I think part of that wow factor, right, is that it's not told. And it's what folks have already been mentioning, that we need to understand our history and how these ideologies continue to really like bleed into every institution and system that we interact with. And you know, just elevating, for example, like the fact that, you know, the recent sterilizations and the ICE detention in Georgia, like we see that in our work in our community and letting people know about our efforts over the past few years. We've gone into communities to just let people know about what has been happening. And it's happened several times now where in spaces of community members actually saying, this has happened to me, going to the doctor, being coerced into sterilizations, and not knowing that this was something that's been happening, that's been institutionalized, that's been really like, you know, so it's almost kind of seen as like matter of fact, where it's not and it shouldn't be. And we should really be able to like understand why these situations even are still happening, and why and how they're impacting our communities.
Yeah, thank you all for responding to that. I have really appreciated just the robustness of all your thoughts and responses. And I guess I'm arriving at, you know, I think this year in particular, we've had a lot of protests, racial unrest, a pandemic in which we've heard more demands and abolitionists thought practices have risen to have broken the surface, so to speak. And I think one of the I think that a lot of the response has been it's impossible. It's impossible to think from an abolition framework. It's impossible to achieve reparations. And I think, you know, some of the feedback is that the same argument was made for chattel slavery in this country, that when abolitionists were working to eradicate that system, that this would never end. And, you know, arguably slavery has mutated into other systems, but chattel slavery in the way that it existed when my ancestors were brought here, for example, has been abolished. And I'm just wondering, a roundabout way of asking y'all to respond to why is it important to have a radical imagination, to lean into demanding reparations, to ask for something that may not seem as large as the harms that have been done, to ask for an apology, to ask for material reparations, etc. How does that all, I hope that I make sense, but I'm asking y'all to sort of talk just about what is the use and the importance of imagining a society, right, and asking for reparations to be given.
I'm gonna jump in a little. So around the time that Kelli and I started working on exposing the sterilization abuse and seeing the patterns, Justice Now is also doing a project with about 200 people inside California's women's prisons around defining what makes justice. because we were an abolitionist organization. We were trying to get to the root of, okay, so what would a true system of justice look like, and not just a system that perpetuates violence, but really creates justice. And over again, the themes that kept coming up were that a real system of justice would acknowledge harms that are happened to someone. It would create safety for people who are in danger of continued harms. And it would also create an opportunity for atonement. And that it was important for justice that there actually be steps taken towards behavioral change and acknowledgement of harms that happened. And I think the reparations movement is important for that, because it is part of the naming of the harm. And yet there's no way that folks are going to be compensated on the level of how they were harmed and made whole. That is not going to happen. It can't happen because the harm was so great. It will do some step towards justice by, again, naming it, by deterring it, by demonstrating that the state has learned that this was inappropriate behavior, and there's a real sort of like kick to it, a responsibility, a financial responsibility, which in our capitalist society right now seems to be the only thing that shows responsibility. And I think, you know, I also just want to say that it's actually not hard for me to imagine what a world without prisons would look like. Prisons have only existed for about 250 years in the history of humankind, so there's been a lot of time without prisons. And I think that we all know and can think of ways where we would address people's root needs and ways to create safety. And many communities have never been able to rely on police to create safety. And honestly, people inside women's prisons can't go to the guards who are harming them and ask them for protection, right? These kinds of abuses wouldn't happen. So people have been creating strategies all the time. And I always tell folks, we don't have a cure for cancer, but that doesn't mean we stop investing in figuring it out. We haven't figured out how to have a perfectly safe society yet, but I think that we're making steps toward it. And this piece of reparations, frankly, I hope is a step towards other kinds of reparations for grave harms, and that we have a real movement in creating accountability for and naming state violence, naming how the state has to be responsible. So, my 2 cents.
All right, then I'll offer a couple pennies too. You know, we see this call now to defund, to disarm police, to shift funds. That's what it's all about. We need to be able to use the billions of dollars that goes into corrections to provide communities with getting their basic needs met. There wouldn't be the need for these very violent institutions, these prisons, you know, very violent places, if folks in the community were getting their needs met, if they were being treated with dignity and respect, if there was housing, quality housing, fair housing, you know, food, healthy foods, gardens, playgrounds. But as you said, Cynthia, we live in a capitalist society. And although slavery, chattel slavery was abolished, you know, it became mass incarceration. So we're always talking about, as I think Lorena mentioned, manifestations. So a manifestation of slavery, free labor, you know, ended up being transformed into this very tyrannical prison system economy. And so I think trying to reimagine what it would look like would mean taking those dollars that we spend, billions of dollars in California, and investing them in communities, in the communities that have been left behind, that have been left to fend for themselves, and providing them with the resources that they so desperately need, so that folks have a hand up. And if we can do that, then there wouldn't be need for folks to spend these outrageous amounts of time in a prison cell, which is another form of eugenics. You know, women have been the fastest and rising population of incarcerated people since the mid 80s. And women are sentenced to very, very long sentence. And youth are sent, 60% of all youth who are sentenced to life without the possibility of parole are 19 years old. So we're looking at how eugenics constantly manifests itself, recreates itself, repackages itself to cause harm on certain bodies. And we've mentioned, you know, the poor, you know, those who are Black and brown in our communities, and those who are disabled. And so in reimagining a world without prisons, we have to imagine the world that we want. And we have to imagine how our tax dollars get used for our neighbors, and stop thinking about ourselves for the most part, and really start to help one another. And I think we can make the world a better place if we use our money wisely and be just good stewards over those billions of dollars that corrections now hold, and shift that money back to the community where it comes from and where it belongs.
Thank you everybody for those really important thoughts and comments. I think one of the things that I think are really that in reimagining, I don't think that it's an impossible thing to achieve, especially because our communities have already been coming up with solutions. Like Cynthia mentioned, our communities know what we need. We know what it is that we need to accomplish and do to thrive and to live with dignity and safety in our communities. And I think that's exactly why reparations is so important, because in a capitalist society, in a society that operates under white supremacy, reparations and that monetary compensation and monetary material acknowledgement is what is needed to be able to hold institutions accountable for systems of oppression that have been so deeply entrenched for so long. And so I do see that this shift and having conversations about reparations is so crucial and it's so important. And I do think that we have already solutions in mind of what a different world and a different visioning of what our communities could look like.
Thank you, Lorena. I'm going to just jump in here and just kind of say that you said radical imagination, right? Towards what this would look like. And I feel that that's what we've been doing. Like, we're already in the moment. We're so in the middle of that right now. It's not even funny. Is that because the radical imagining started when me and Cynthia was sitting at the table, and after being told what happened, we said, what do we do next? And we knew that we were going up against a system that has been fortified for over 400 years. And that was beyond, that was radical for us. It was radical for me, it was radical for her as well. And then for us to be with CCWP, draft, CLRJ, us coming together was radical imagining, because everyone had their own, sometimes we in these silos when we're trying to get our agendas and try to get our causes met. But to stop for a moment and say, hey, wait a minute, what Cynthia and Kelli was working on, what DREF is working on, what CLRJ is working on, let's redefine, let's recreate this so that it can include all of us together. Because when we were starting that fight, we were totally on trying to deal with the incarcerated people. I had not even imagined about the mental or medical institutions that these things were happening. And then so when Cynthia said, wait a minute, and they began to talk, then it was like, okay, now being able to also come together, right? Come together, and if we are going towards the same goal as well. So it's not just going up against the system. We have to also look at how we have to come together as organizations and thus fighting in those movements and seeing what is more important at this time than just getting our agendas met. You get what I'm saying? Or just fighting for our specific causes for our specific population, because really this is as you name the fact that you named disabilities, you name Latinx, you name indigenous, people of color, Black, women, all of those things, LGBT. So it's not just like a specific population thing. This is a human thing. And at this time, it'll go back to whether or not, if you have brown hair, if you have green eyes, as to the fact of whether or not, and that's eugenics, as to whether you deserve to be a mother, whether you deserve to work, or whatever the situation may be. If we do not stop these things now, if we do not come together in order to eradicate these practices, then it's just going to be a new, different kind of population that's going to be the target. You get what I'm saying? It's going to be it's going to be another race of people that might be the minority, or may not have the stronger voice or the financial power. It's just going to be another. So it's like, I just feel like it's very necessary that we come together. That we stay. It's just like when I was watching, I'm gonna say this, just like when I was watching, you talked about the racial movement of what sparked it, and really what sparked that movement of watching George Floyd was what you heard from the Hispanic population, the white population, the Chinese population, the Black population, is everybody could identify when he cried out for his mother. And that was something that hit us in such a way, or either for people to understand that in that moment of crisis of needing their mother, right? And so everybody came together on this movement. And I think that at this point, that's where we are. So when we've been talking about the sterilization thing for 20 years in California, and then now we're hearing the cry that sounds like a similar cry that we heard in California. Now we hear it in Georgia. And then the fact that Virginia and North Carolina already did it is just the fact that we have to push this movement to come together, because it is about sustaining life. It's bigger than just reproductive justice. It's about sustaining the life, the cycle of it. You know what I'm saying? And to me, anybody who gets to say that you cannot do this is playing God. And so whether we call it playing God, but it's having that type of power in your hands to say who should create, who should not create, who should be and who not should be. And it's like reimagining what that will look like. It's just, I think I just pretty much feel like we're just in the moment of it right now. We're in the heat of the battle. And every woman that you see right now that's on this panel has been on the front line for some years now. We're on the front line of creating and evolving that image of what that should be. You know what I'm saying? And this is not an easy thing to do. I know we can put it in legal terms, we can put it in social and clinical terms, but this is not easy shit we doing. And it's not easy things that we are, this is not easy. It's not easy for the survivor to constantly have to continuously tell their story. You know, it's not easy. It's just not easy for us, you know? And so it's not that we want to do it, we fucking doing it. We're doing it right now. We're doing it right now. You know what I'm saying? So, and we've been hit with so many barriers. We've been hit with so many barriers and so much opposition, you know? And this is the third time that draft and CLRJ has amended a bill and have gotten shot down. Like we've already got the vision. Now it's about the movement. You know what I'm saying? We've already imagined it. We've already written it down plain and simple. And we only asking for 3 things that can create that. And right now we just in the battle of trying to get that and make that happen. You know, in the words of City Girls, period. You know?
Yes. I love a City Girls reference. That's the perfect way to end anything, really. Period. Gotta do it with the with the hand motion. Period. Okay, sorry. I want to, I know we're almost out of time, but I want to wrap up sort of just asking y'all to go around and briefly say what keeps you in this work, what makes you feel fulfilled, what brings you joy, what makes you wake up in the morning when you don't want to do this work, and fight anyway.
Sure, so I guess I can start this time. For me, I guess, related to this bill, related to this these reparations, related to this budget ask, I think about the 455 people who are still alive from the 20,000 people who were sterilized during the eugenics era. And I think about how 100 more of them approximately are dying each year. And if I don't roll out of bed every day and fight for their rights, they too, like the 19,500 people before them, will die without any form of justice. So for me, that's what I would say.
That's a little bit hard to follow. But I agree. I think for me, like it has to happen. We have to get this done, and I don't see like another alternative. Like there's no other, in terms of like I can't just sit and do nothing, and I think that's what fuels me, and that's what motivates me to really nonstop, like no matter how many barriers we face with this particular budget request, is to still try to find ways to make it happen and find new strategies and new people to have conversations with, and really to just do whatever we can to see this happen.
I guess I'll go. So, you know, despite having witnessed a whole lot of horrible stuff in the world, I remain, frankly, an optimist. And because I have seen so much resiliency and beauty from people inside prison, that I can't help but be inspired about the power of people to, in fact, make change happen. And it's just everything I've learned about dignity and resiliency and honor and loyalty has come from people inside prison who I have worked alongside. And I know that we are capable of making spectacular things happen, and we are in such a transformative moment right now. People are talking about things that 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I never would have thought people would be talking about. I had to pull my car over and stop my car because a business show on NPR was having a conversation about prison industrial complex abolition. I was like, what? That is like, but anyway, like, I just, like, we are there. We are like a hot moment away from it. Fascism is rising up because we are almost there. So it's just like, be an optimist, be part of the change, be part of the movement, challenge yourself to find one thing you can do to challenge white supremacy every day. And together we can make this happen.
Now I have to follow that. Thank you, Cynthia. Well, as a formerly incarcerated Black woman here in America, and, you know, just living in the past 50 years and seeing so much turmoil, but also, as Cynthia mentioned, seeing the beauty and the rise of the human spirit, knowing what people are capable of, how folks have been able to reinvent their whole lives, turn their lives around, recreate themselves, build communities out of nothing. I mean, the resiliency of the human spirit, what we possess as human beings. You know, we can't ever marginalize a group of folks because they are a certain color or they have a certain ability or, you know, or a certain gender. We must get up every day fighting for justice for all. It is about justice for all, making this planet the planet that we want to see everyone thrive and survive in. You know, and that's what gets me up every morning, knowing that I have an organization like CCWP and people like Kelli who have survived similar experiences that I have, and watching her speak so articulately about her experiences. You know, to survive what you have gets me up every morning, and knowing that you are calling us all in to work together, to put our resources, our talents, and our energies together, and to care collectively for one another is what gets me up every morning. And if I just make one more point, I would love for folks to visit our website at womenprisoners.org, sign up for our e-newsletter so that you can follow what we're doing and get daily updates about reparations here in California if you're interested. And that's womenprisoners.org. We want to see this go through, you know, the budget, the notification. We all deserve to be treated with that dignity and respect. And Kelli, thank you so much for pouring your heart out and sharing today.
Well, I think we might be out of time, unless Kelli wants to give us. You don't want to let us know what gets you up. It could be City Girls. It could be.
Okay, I'm just gonna say this real quick. Is that what gets me up? Is that it's bigger than me. It's bigger than me. And at time, you know, there was even though it is about me, and it's okay for times for it to be about us, and for us to, you know, quiet down the world and to slow it down and to practice that self-care and get recentered. But at the same time, when you know that, this is the one thing I'm gonna say, is that when you have the feeling, when you get the urge to move, to act, to speak out, to stop something that in your heart, in your human heart, you feel that is not right, then it's not about you in that moment. It's about humanity. So what gets me out of bed every morning is the fact that although Kelli doesn't feel like doing shit, okay, but then I know that I have about 10,000 or 20,000 other women that is coming behind me for years to come that this will affect. That's what gets me out of bed every morning. And so until, when I say that this is not my happy ending, meaning that until we have actually done what was necessary to shut it down, then I'm not going to rest. You know, sometimes, and I'm going to keep saying again, our purpose is birthed in our pain.
Well, thank you all so much. This was a great way to spend my Friday evening, and appreciating everyone who attended and spoke on this panel. And I'll turn it maybe back over to Erica, but thank y'all and good night.
Thank you all. This is such an incredible panel. Thank you all for being here, and what a privilege and an honor to share this space together tonight. For everyone who's watching, if you haven't yet had an opportunity to see the film, get your tickets to see Belly of the Beast in virtual cinemas across the country at bellyofthebeastfilm.com/watch. And if you haven't yet heard the amazing original song by Mary J. Blige that is featured in the film and the trailer, you can check it out on all platforms, See What You've Done. And just wanted to invite you all tomorrow for a discussion led by activist and educator Patrice Cullors and co-presented by the Groundswell Fund about the ways reproductive justice is on the ballot this November. Also with Sister Reach, Black Women for Wellness, our producer, Belly the Beast producer Angela Tucker, and Kelli Dillon will also be on that panel tomorrow. So thank you all. For those who are watching, please join and share about the film. Good night.